This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Frida's back in the chair after doing some traveling. I can hear it in your voice, but you must have had a ball while you were away. Good to have you back. And today we're talking to somebody that's going to share some really interesting information about something that's, well, a big part of Lake Superior and that whole Keweenaw Peninsula.
You know, Walt, when we travel, and many times on this program, we talk about beauty. And one of the best is when you've got a beautiful place that's just jam-packed with history. And that's what I think draws us to the Keweenaw to begin with. It's just so spectacular, that landscape. But to know that it has been an important place for cultures thousands of years old. And I think the best person to tell us all about it is the Upper Peninsula historian, and that's Barry James himself.
Yeah, Barry James joins us now, Upper Peninsula historian with the Michigan History Center. Barry, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let's first of all, now, Barry, I got to say this. You and I have talked over the years of various things because you're affiliated with Michigan Iron Industry Museum in Marquette County in the UP of Michigan, but you're also connected with Fort Wilkins, and that's at the top of the Keweenaw Peninsula. Tell us first and foremost about these hats that you wear. You have a history and a knowledge sort of thing with them, but what all do you do?
Sure. As historian for the Upper Peninsula, actually there's 2 of us, my coworker Troy Henderson. Both of our main offices at the Michigan Iron Industry Museum in Negaunee Township, which is a museum dedicated to iron mining communities and the people who worked in the iron ranges up here. And Troy is actually the historian down at Fayette Historic Town Site on the Garden Peninsula, and I am historian up at Fort Wilkins. And as part of our responsibilities, we take care of artifact collections and interpretation at those sites, as well as presenting programs to the public.
Little bit of everything. So you have a long background in history, Upper Peninsula historian now at the Michigan History Center. Let's talk a little bit about some of the history here, including you mentioned Fort Wilkins. This is located at the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula of Upper Michigan into Lake Superior in the Copper Harbor area. It's been a state park for several decades, over 100 years. Why is this area of Fort Wilkins, the Keweenaw Peninsula, Copper Harbor so significant in our Great Lakes history?
Well, it dates back to really just after statehood. Dr. Douglas Houghton was Michigan's first state geologist, and he was conducting a linear and geological survey. And during his exploration, just after Michigan became a state in 1840, he was exploring in the Copper Harbor area, and he documented veins of copper. And the main one was just off of the lighthouse point at Copper Harbor. And Houghton ends up writing a report to the Michigan legislature that goes viral. If it was to happen today, it would be all over the national news. And people really wanted to start going up there to explore and look for copper, so they established a mineral land agency to basically regulate the mining activity on Porter's Island at the mouth of Copper Harbor. So for people that were searching for iron deposits or copper deposits, they had to travel all the way up to Copper Harbor to get a permit to go into the lands and explore. The issue that the government had was they sent up Walter Cunningham from the lead mines of Illinois to administer those permits. And if there was any problems with the hundreds of explorers that were coming up there for military support, he'd have to go to Fort Brady at Sault Ste. Marie. And that's a long ways away from Copper Harbor. So they decided to build Fort Wilkins at Copper Harbor to serve as a buffer between the miners and any problems that might occur with the Native Americans, and to provide some law and order.
Isn't that hilarious? Because we have some people now that say, I'm not going to travel US 41 to Copper Harbor.
Yeah.
And these guys had to do this primarily by boat. Weren't they coming by boat, Barry?
Yeah, their regimental headquarters is at Fort Wayne in Detroit, so it took them almost a month because they had to offload. The Sioux Lock was not built yet at Sault Ste. Marie, so they came up on a steamer or on a boat called the Clinton, offloaded all of their supplies to the John Jacob Astor. And we're talking two companies of soldiers, which is about 100 men, plus officers' wives and their families, coming up to build the fort in that little inlet and strip of land between Copper Harbor and Lake Fannie Hou.
This is really fascinating when I think about it, because I'm somebody that grew up in that region. I'm very familiar with the Keweenaw Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I'm familiar with where you're talking about. I've visited Fort Wilkins many times as a kid and for school stuff and things like that. But the history of it being there, and then the overall history of copper mining in that area, this is really something that, I mean, this has a huge significance to Lake Superior, but you also there are actively updating this information, and you're making sure people know what's going on. And I understand that might be a new exhibit you're working on, or something that's going to be unveiled. Can you give us a little bit of history about that, or a little bit of info about what's coming up?
Sure. The three themes that we focus on at Fort Wilkins are military history from the mid-1800s, maritime history with both lighthouses, the Range Light and the Copper Harbor Main Light, and also the Pittsburgh and Boston Company mine sites, the copper mine sites that are within the park. This upcoming summer, we're expanding an exhibit and taking a piece out of one and putting it as a standalone in another. Last year, we upgraded our archaeological exhibit called Clues to the Past, and within that exhibit, we talk about the importance of artifacts and archaeology and the information that we can get, because we've done several archaeological digs at Fort Wilkins. But as part of that exhibit, there was a component about Fort Wilkins becoming a state park. And we've decided to take that out and expand on the information, and we're going to be putting it as a standalone permanent exhibit in the West Mess Hall building, which has been closed to the public for several decades. So we're going to be able to open a building, put a new exhibit in there talking about how and why Fort Wilkins became a state park and the story behind it.
And that was in 1923, correct, Barry? That it was.
Yep, that's correct. We've been planning this exhibit, and we wanted to put it in a couple of years ago, but we ran into some cost overruns, and now we've been able to raise the funding, and it's going to be a really nice addition to that part of the park, as well as, you know, the visitors, when they come into Fort Wilkins, usually go past the married enlisted men's cabins where we have an orientation and that sort of thing, and then go all the way around the square, and the last building that they'll encounter will be Fort Wilkins becoming a state park.
Okay. Now, for someone that is not familiar with Fort Wilkins, as I said a moment ago, I know it very well. I grew up in that area, visited it several times. This is an opportunity to get somewhat of an experience of what this was like when it was an actual military fort. Describe it for our listeners to the podcast here that maybe are listening on the other side of the planet, that they don't quite know what this is. What is Fort Wilkins? Give us sort of an overview, or a Barry James walkthrough.
Sure. What it really represents is an excellent example of a mid-19th century military post as the United States was expanding westward. And in theory, Fort Wilkins was the northern point of a chain of military posts on the western frontier. And we're fortunate enough, we've got 19 buildings on site, but 12 are original, dating back to the 1840s. So people can go into these buildings, look at the exhibits. We have period rooms with furniture and interpretation of the period. And we also offer a living history program that's been ongoing since 1976, where we have costumed interpreters within the fort that represent the last occupation at Fort Wilkins, the summer of 1870. So visitors have the opportunity to learn about the fort's history in a different way by talking to people who portray the past.
We're talking with Barry James here today on the podcast. He is, well, among several things, he is the Upper Peninsula historian for the Michigan History Center, Michigan Iron Industry Museum administrator, of course, affiliated with Fort Wilkins, what we're talking about here a lot on our podcast today. Can you explain for us how it is a state park, but it's also connected to what is the Keweenaw National Historical Park in that area?
Yeah, the Keweenaw National Historical Park and has something called heritage sites. And these sites, the federal government and their advisory commission at that park partner with sites owned and operated by state and local governments. So basically the sites that they partner with, I believe there's at least 12. A couple are the Honka Homestead and also the Quincy Mine site and several others. And each Keweenaw heritage site contains, significant cultural and or natural resources and make a unique contribution to the copper mining history of the region and the Keweenaw Peninsula.
And Barry, in addition to the military history, there's also this exquisite lighthouse there. And that is really important to the development of that whole Keweenaw Peninsula as well. Share how that came to be.
Well, it actually began with the wreck of the John Jacob Astor in 1844, which at the time was one of only two supply vessels to Fort Wilkins. And when the Astor went down, the Astor was the first wreck on Lake Superior in 1844. The military realized that their lifeline could be easily snapped. So they were fortunate enough that another vessel came in to get them supplies during their first winter in 1844. But the federal government realized that there was more, with the discovery of copper and the discovery of iron in the Upper Peninsula, more and more people were coming up here, and they needed aids to navigation. So in 1847, Congress appropriated money to build the first lighthouses on Lake Superior at Copper Harbor and at Whitefish Point. And the first light was built in 1848 and opened in 1849. It had a keeper's dwelling with a separate light tower. And then Copper Harbor was pretty significant even into the mid-1860s. And after the Civil War era, they built a set of range lights and another range lighthouse in 1868. So Copper Harbor actually has two lighthouses, the main light on the point, which marks the entrance to Copper Harbor. And that light was rebuilt in 1866. It's still an active aid to navigation. There's a steel tower out there that houses the active aid. And the range light was built in 1868, and that building still stands as well. But at the main light on the point, we do have a maritime museum where visitors can go into the old keeper's dwelling. We talk about the importance of shipping, the building of that site, and also the 1866 lighthouse, which is set up as a period lighthouse. About 1910 or so is the time period that we portray. And there's also walking trails as well.
The significance of those lighthouses, especially when you realize that people were coming all the way up the shoreline to get their mining permits. Mm-hmm. And at that point, so I'm going to link for just a second, the iron industry history in Negaunee. People that wanted to mine in Negaunee had to go to Copper Harbor to get their permit and then back?
That's correct.
How long would that take?
Usually you would trek across Lake Superior in a open boat or canoe or a bateau. It took about 3 days, depending on weather conditions. There's been several accounts that you read in the history where people had to beat back to Whitefish Point and or Sault Ste. Marie because of the winds out of the northwest, which would caused some problems because a lot of people, when you think of Lake Superior, we often think of its beauty and how pure it is, but there's long stretches where there's no place to land boats. For example, the Pictured Rocks area and a rocky shoreline up in the Keweenaw Peninsula. So places like Copper Harbor were very important as a safe harbor of refuge for people in these boats looking for shelter during storms.
And, I invite listeners, not when you're driving. Don't do this right now. Don't start scrolling and finding a map of Lake Superior, but to understand that Copper Harbor is on the north shore of the Keweenaw Peninsula. And I love to say that the Keweenaw is the upper peninsula of the upper peninsula.
Correct.
So it is really up there. And when you imagine, I have battled in my kayak those north winds, and I can't even begin to think that they could do that from Sault Ste. Marie to Copper Harbor in 3 days. It's mind-boggling to even imagine that. But wow, the significance of what we see when we see those range lights and we see those lighthouses, they're not just so, photographic, perfect.
Right.
They were there for a reason.
It's interesting, Barry, as we talk to you here today, and we are talking with Barry James. He's Upper Peninsula historian with the Michigan History Center, talking about Fort Wilkins, Lake Superior, the Copper Harbor area, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Barry, you tell this information and you share this information freely. You're a seasoned veteran of being an historian. Can you explain to me how you work with young people, getting them involved in this? Because obviously you have a passion for it, but there are people that are coming up that have it. How do you work with them in terms of with young historians, and how do you get them interested in this history?
Sure. Through the years, we've developed here at the Michigan Iron Industry Museum several outreach education programs, and actually the first 15 years of my career I was an educator. So I would be going into schools and trying to get students interested in our historic sites that the state not only administers, but Michigan history as well. So we've developed a youth organization here. It's basically a history club at the Michigan Iron Industry Museum called the Future Historians. And we meet once a month during the school year to learn about Michigan history-related topics and some natural history. And then in the summertime, in conjunction with the Adult Living History program, we offer 4 3-day living history day camps at Fort Wilkins where youth can dress in costume and pretend they live in the summer of 1870. There's a little bit more to it than just dressing up. They have to go through training. We provide a manual so they can learn about school and the village of Copper Harbor and Fort Wilkins. And they also have to write an autobiography of themselves because they portray people that we pulled from the actual 1870 census. So they need to know their parents, where they live, what they do. And then they teach, I like to say it's like kids teaching kids about history. They're on the parade ground, they're hauling water with a yoke or something, and they get a chance to talk to people about the history of Copper Harbor and the fort during the last summer that the fort was occupied in 1870.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's a fully immersive experience for them, because I remember as a kid and even as a young adult having the opportunity to, go to the park, go to Fort Wilkins and interact with them, and they got it down. They know their family and they're willing to talk about it. What do you got in the works this summer? I mean, what's happening this upcoming summer season, the tourism season, the main one, and any special events? What's coming up?
Sure. Our standard living history program with our adult interpreters will begin on June 16th and end on August 22nd. Our Future Historians Youth Group will be up there for 4 workshops, July 9 through 11, 20 through to 24, August 6 through 8, and August 13th through 15th. But during COVID, we got away from having our Civil War Artillery Encampment, Battery D, out of Jackson, Michigan. They will be returning again this summer. They came back. So they will be encamping and taking over the fort parade ground the last weekend in July. So that would be July 25th, 26th, and 27th. And they come up and bring their cannons, and they do small arms demonstrations and civilian personalities, and really do a nice job because there was infantry at Fort Wilkins. There wasn't artillery, so they get an opportunity to show the public a little bit more about Civil War life and also bring the place alive in a different way.
Barry, God bless you for getting those kids active and involved. And, all of the things that they have to do to be prepared to go up there and represent history. Is there anything when you're working with the kids that really surprises them? Like, what? No internet? Or, oh my gosh, how do they, how do they communicate with each other if they didn't have a video game? Or, what really is something that I guess, their take home from being in the 1870s?
Sure. I think you touched on a few of them, Frida, and I agree with that. And the amenities and utilities and things that we have and we take for granted, when they're up there, they get an opportunity to really experience what life may have been like back then and try to portray that to people who have earbuds and cell phones and things like that. and the challenge too to stay in character, because this is first person, so they don't know anything about the Detroit Pistons or things like that. So they do a really nice job. And then the last part of the sessions too, we also break out games, and that is another way for them to interact with kids and teach them how to play games from the Civil War time period. So I really think they get a sense of ownership of the site. I've seen it over the years where former future historians will come up, and I'll see them there, and they're bringing their families. And to me, that's the greatest thing about it is, they had such a good time that they're bringing their families back to tell them about their experiences up there.
It's funny. Cool. It's funny, Barry, you talk about that. It's like, I remember going there as a kid, and it was August. And there was no air conditioning, even the simple things like that. I mean, walking around inside those buildings where there's not a lot of airflow happening and everything like that, it gives you an instant understanding of that.
But then let's talk about winter.
Yeah, I've never experienced it at wintertime up there, and I know that a lot of that closes up and everything. But there is interesting challenges, I'm sure, with this role playing.
Yeah, the role-playing program's in the summer, but this winter time, if folks wanted to come and visit, the park is open, and we do have people that snowshoe and cross-country ski through it. As you know, Walt, the Keweenaw Peninsula gets a lot of snow.
Yeah, it does.
And those soldiers, I try to imagine them living up there. I've been up there, and I have walked over the stockade, which is 9 feet tall on drifts.
Wow.
And I've been in the parade ground on snowshoes where it's been 5 foot on the level, easy.
Jeez.
So it's a beautiful place in the summertime, but it has its beauty in the winter as well. And people also ice fish and go out on the harbor there for fishing in the summer and wintertime for that matter.
So if people want to find out a little bit more about Fort Wilkins, how can they do that? Are there any tips for visitors that you want to share?
Yeah, I'd recommend just going online and doing a search, but if they're looking for a website in particular, MichiganDNR.com, and just do a search for Fort Wilkins, or the Michigan History Center site is www.michigan.gov, MHC, and that will take you to some information about the fort and the Copper Harbor lighthouses.
Okay, so now we started this conversation off, Barry, with you as well as the Upper Peninsula historian for the Michigan History Center, but we talked about Fort Wilkins. We touched a little bit on the Michigan Iron Industry Museum in Negaunee Township in Marquette County in the UP. How can people find out more about what Barry James does?
Yeah, I just recommend if they're interested in some of the work that Troy and I do, they can contact us at the Michigan Iron Industry Museum in Negaunee Township and just give us a call at 906-475-7857.
That sounds good to me. Now, it's interesting, Barry, talking with you about this. I mean, a lot of our podcast has to do with Lake Superior, the big lake, all of that. And this little bit of insight that you've shared with us here over this last little while about Fort Wilkins and its role in the shipping and the business development, the economic development, the mining development of the area, why it was all there has been really interesting. What have you learned by learning about it? What is it that's been really something that's resonated with you as you've unpacked the story of not only copper mining, but iron mining, and that's across the whole Iron Range on the south shore of Lake Superior and all of that? I mean, what have you learned? What have you found through this?
I think just the significance of the historic site at Copper Harbor, and I really think that our exhibits and interpretation really match up with the National Park Service efforts. We've done several decades of interpretation and putting new exhibits in there and really trying to expand on themes and make it more interactive for visitors. And I really think that we've done a good job with that. And the significance of the place, both the lighthouses and the Fort Wilkins Historic Complex are all on the National Register of Historic Places. So, and to get on the National Register of Historic Places, you really have to have something significant with the historic site. So that says enough right there. But and to have 12 original buildings standing from the 1840s. I mean, not a lot of historic sites can say that or have that as well.
Especially in that climate.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, that you were able to keep those roofs on.
Yeah. It must be an interesting process as you kind of keep an eye on the place. You keep it running. Of course, the maintenance to keep it there. But I mean, you've maintained the look, the feel. It's authentic. That's one thing that's important, I think, for people to remember. The other thing, Barry, I want to mention is if people do decide to make the journey to Fort Wilkins to experience Lake Superior in a unique way, go up Brockway Mountain Drive as well, because you can stand up there on the mountaintop and you can see the lake all around you. And that's got to resonate also when you talk to people that are visiting, maybe for the first time, right, Barry?
Well, the beauty of the place, right? You've got water, you've got woods, you've got winter. It really is unique. Not only the amount of snow, but on the flip side, there's the insects and the bugs. But that's part of the Upper Peninsula, right?
It is.
So, but yeah, to camp at that site and to be able to see, and it's also a mecca for bike riding. That's really taken off within the last couple of decades in Copper Harbor. And, of course, the takeoff point to go to Isle Royale is also in Copper Harbor. So the village itself has a lot of amenities that it's not only a destination, but it can take you elsewhere as well.
Well, Barry, we appreciate this time with you today. You've shared some really cool information about some significant points on Lake Superior, and that's what we like to talk about. So I appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
It's Barry James. He is an Upper Peninsula historian with the Michigan History Center. He's also with the Michigan Iron Industry Museum and also with Fort Wilkins, all of the stuff, Frida, that we talked about with him. And I think that if anybody's listening to this, that they have the wherewithal to get to visit Lake Superior, you would be remiss not to go up the Keweenaw Peninsula and check out all of the historic stuff there, but also see the things that Barry was talking about.
To know that they're bringing the children in and the children are starting to tell that story too. Well, actually, I think the Young Historians program is over 30 years old. And to know that how cool that the kids that were the Young Historians are now bringing back their own families and sharing with those children what it's all about, because that area there's always something to do. You might not want to be dressed as a gladiator coming down the flow trail, Mach 10 hair on fire fast. Or just, I would caution anybody that thinks that they can take their front wheel drive vehicle on the road to High Rock Bay and to go out to see the rocket launch out there. Nah. Find somebody that's got a pretty good pickup or just go out on your bike. It's going to be kind of loopy out there and you might get a little mud on you, but you are going to have just a spectacular time. There's so much to see, both sides of that peninsula.
And it is always fun to talk about the elements of Lake Superior like we do here on the podcast. This in particular, if you look up on the map, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there's a peninsula up that way, and that's the Keweenaw Peninsula, and that's what we've been talking about with Barry James here today. Again, Upper Peninsula historian with the Michigan History Center. It's pretty much going to do it for us on this episode, but I always do remind people that if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about, dig into a little bit with the Big Blue, you can find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. Get us your ideas. We'd love to hear from you, but that's going to do it for this conversation. Thanks to Barry James joining us. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.